Hello, and welcome to another virtual author event at the Poison Pen Bookstore. Today, the Poison Pen is delighted to have with us as our very special guest author, Mindy Quigley. Did I get that right?
You did?
Whose new book is Deep Six. Now I got the title wrong. 6 Feet Deep Dish. Sorry about that, Mindy. Before we begin chatting, I would like to let those listening in know that the Poison Pen does have copies of 6 Feet Deep Dish, and we would be happy to hold one for you or put it in the mail. It's real easy to do. Just go online to the bookstore or give us a call, and we can connect you with this truly terrific series launch. And now I'd like to welcome Mindy.
Hi, I'm delighted to be here.
Thank you for joining us. My first question for you is, can you tell us a little bit about yourself before you became a published author, because you have a fascinating background kind of in the science area.
I do. Yeah, I've had a weird journey in my career. So after I finished graduate school in history, I got a master's degree in history, and linguistics was my undergrad degree. But I quickly found that I gravitated more towards jobs that were in the biomedical science field. So my first job was working with hospital chaplains in the Duke University Medical Center, and ultimately ended up writing many years later, a series of cozy mysteries with a young female hospital chaplain in North Carolina as the protagonist. So that kind of percolated for a very long time, the interesting work that hospital chaplains do, really at just like the extremities of human emotion. And from there, we moved to Scotland. My husband is British, so he got a job at the University of Edinburgh. And I took a job. Next, I was the personal assistant to the guy who cloned Dolly the sheep.
Really?
So, yeah. So that got kind of deeper into biomedicine than I ever imagined that I would go. And it was really interesting to be working with, these high-level scientists who were doing stem cell stuff. And I had to learn a lot just to be conversant in like the day-to-day of what I was doing. So behind the scenes, I was like reading and re-educating myself as quickly as I could. And then from there, I was still working a little bit with that group on some projects in Asia, but I also got a job for the University of Edinburgh project managing J.K. Rowling's mother died of multiple sclerosis. So she gave a huge donation to the university to set up a regenerative neurology clinic in her mother's memory. So this was using stem cells and regenerative medicine to try to get at some of these really hard to treat neurological conditions like ALS, like multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's, and other things. So that project management role took me through my last 2 or 3 years in Edinburgh. We opened the clinic. We had a really amazing gala launch in the Edinburgh Castle with John Gurdon, who won the Nobel Prize, and J.K. Rowling was there, and the First Minister of Scotland. And then I left. So it really was kind of like going out on a high note. And I remember thinking, like, this is probably the coolest thing that I will ever do. There's really no chance that I'm ever going to do anything quite as cool as this. Because, in addition to just all the being able to bask in the reflected glory of all those famous people, it's an incredible research clinic, and diseases that are very close to my heart that, my great grandmother died of ALS, and one of my cousin's wives has MS from a very young age. So that was nice to be a part of that work too. So then we came back to the States, and I had that chaplain series kicking around for a while. It was sitting with Teresa Chris, who's Louise Penny's agent, and she tried to sell it and she couldn't. It was just too weird.
That's
it was
interesting.
Yeah, it was. I think that I didn't understand at the time that I was writing a cozy. So it has, it's a in terms of, no sex, no violence, all that's off the page. It is a cozy, but it's probably a little bit more
serious in tone.
Serious. Yeah. I mean, it's very funny. There's a lot of slapstick in it almost, the tone I think is cozy, but it was just thematically an odd mixture. There was like a lot of history in it, a lot of character building, a lot of, sort of like medical stuff. And then you've got this female chaplain. So it wasn't quite as easy to place as something like, say, Grant Chester or other cozy mysteries that center around the clergy.
Mhm.
So I think that anyway, so she had trouble selling it. I ended up selling it to a very small publisher who mostly focused on kind of like direct to Kindle publishing. And this was
Oh,
10 years ago.
so that was like right at the start of indie.
Right. So, I mean, it was well placed. It actually, I think of now what we accomplished with that book. Just it was, a team of, I think they had 3 people at the publisher, 2 of whom were part-time. It was like they basically just exploited those Kindle algorithms and the things that were possible back in the day to rise above the
Mhm.
noise, which now would be, they're just books
Oh, yeah.
flooding onto the market every day. It would be really difficult to replicate that. Um, so yeah, and then that kind of takes me, but then still, because I wasn't making huge money, I got a job at the vet school at Virginia Tech when we moved back to the
Oh,
States. So I'm still working part-time as a clinical research coordinator at the vet school. So I do all of their companion animal research studies, which are essentially just the same as human clinical trials, but with fur.
yes, they're nicer.
Yes, I say that all the time, like both the patients and the clinicians are much nicer.
Well, that's fascinating. And if I understand correctly, you'd finished your Lindsay Harding series, and you were at this point seriously debating whether you wanted to continue as a writer. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. So I wrote a book, a middle grade children's book that I love. I still love that book. And it was always the bridesmaid, never a bride kind of near miss thing with trying to get that one published as well. And I just didn't have the energy at that point to go the same route of really hustling the way that I had with the Lindsay Harding thing, because there was no infrastructure really for marketing and things like that. The marketing was like a 1-page sheet with bullet points, like do social media. I just didn't have what it took, I felt, to do that again with a new
Mm.
series off my own back. So if I wasn't going to be able to get it traditionally published with some more guidance, I felt like I just couldn't go anywhere with it. So that took me a couple of years. And in the meantime, I had my son, my second child. He's 5 now, but I struggled pretty hard with some health and mental health issues after he was born. So I was not in a place to be creative I wrote a few short stories, but I wasn't in a place to devote myself to a novel for quite some time. So then, when I kind of came out of all of that and took stock, I just thought, I don't know, like it's really, really hard to persevere.
Mhm.
Um, and it seemed easier to give up. And then out of the blue, Pizza Cat.
And this was kind of the prelude to 6 Feet Deep Dish. Can you tell us a little bit about how that series came into being?
So it was a matchmaking thing, and I did not know that this existed. This type of
Um,
authorial publishing relationship existed, so the publisher had this idea that was essentially pizza plus cat. I saw an interview that you did recently where the author was saying like, oh, this book is really hard to describe. I wish I had written a book that was a little bit easier to
mhm.
describe. And mine is like 2 emojis, pizza, cat. The description. But they wanted somebody to write a new cozy series that's centered around pizza and cats.
Mhm.
um, so there's a writer, Lindy Walker, who I'd met when I was publicizing the Chaplain series, and she'd read my stuff and knew that I was currently without an agent and currently without a publisher, and she liked my stuff enough to be like, hey, I really think that you could do this, so why don't you pitch for it? So she put me in touch with them, and I wrote a pitch, and that became 6 Feet Deep Dish. So I just kind of took those elements and let them percolate with things that I was familiar with. I grew up in Chicago, so deep dish pizza was immediately where my mind went
Mm.
when we're talking about pizza. And then we had done a research study at the vet school at Virginia Tech on feline obesity and weight loss.
Oh.
And I had gotten to know a lot of fat cats and their owners through that process. And I realized that there was something about fat cats that I loved. Like I like the way that they look. I like the way that they interact. I think that their behavior, because really when we talk about our pets, it's
Mhm.
mostly the quirkiness of
Mhm.
their behaviors that we respond to, the things that they do, that crazy, like run around the table as fast as they can. And fat cats, because they tend to be food seeking as their primary motivation, can really get up to some hilarious antics.
Mm.
And then I think I also identified with the struggle,
Yeah.
like of having a pet who, for their health, it would be better if they, were healthier. And we have that with our dog, and I have that with myself. We all have that struggle.
It
So I
is
think
tough because they'll sit there in the kitchen and look at you like, why aren't you giving me the food I want? It's like, no, this is what
yes.
the vet says you're supposed to eat, or
Yes, absolutely. And there were all these tricks that we would try. We would be able to get them to eat zucchini sometimes if we
really?
shredded it and then put this like flavor powder on it. They would eat that as like a way to promote satiety without gaining weight. But that whole struggle, I felt like there's a lot there that people are going to identify with their pets, and the way that kind of reflects back onto your own self-image and your own concerns about whether you're being a good pet parent. Because at the end of the day, it's almost a bigger responsibility. I have human children, so I feel like I can say this. It's almost a bigger responsibility than having human children, because human children eventually like go off to school or some kind of, they have a lot of external inputs into their lives, where the pet, it's pretty much down to you to shape the way that they are in the world. So there can be a lot of fear and guilt, associated with that, but also a lot of, great deal of joy and enjoyment.
They are. Tell us a little bit about 6 Feet Deep Dish.
So in addition to being just pizza and cats, I created a protagonist, Delilah O'Leary, who's a chef with traditional high-end restaurant experience. So she's worked mostly in kind of high-end hotels and restaurants in the city of Chicago. And now she's breaking out on her own to start her restaurant. And she decides to go with a deep dish pizza restaurant, which strikes some people, around her as an odd choice. But for her, it's about, creating a comforting and welcoming place that people would like to go, and that kind of evokes childhood memories almost, or memories of enjoyment. So she hires her best friend, her longtime best friend, as her sous chef, and things seem to be falling into place for her. But then on opening night, she and her fiance, who's bankrolling the restaurant, have a huge blow up. He leaves her with her cat Butterball. And now it's actually his cat that's now her cat.
But she
And
loves him more.
she loves him more, yes. And she's got suddenly a lot of problems to deal with. And then to add to that, on the soft launch opening night, there's a murder, and her aunt is stuck holding the murder weapon. So is like right in the heart of what happened. So she's got to now contend with the murder, she's got to contend with the breakup, and she's got to contend with trying to get her business off the ground with all of this stuff chundering along in the background.
Originally, if I understand correctly, there was kind of some negotiation about the setting of the book too, because it's in Lake Geneva. You can tell us a little bit about that as a setting, but you had wanted something different.
That's right. Actually, let's see. Okay, can you see my Chicago?
Oh, I can, yes.
So I'm from Chicago, and my first inclination was to put the book in Chicago. I wanted it to be in Hyde Park in Chicago, and which is a wonderful neighborhood, very interesting, lots of cool history. And I had thought right from the start that one element that I wanted to run through the books was kind of like the old school Chicago mob connections. Because like it or not, if you travel the world, I remember being in Peru and saying that I was from Chicago, and somebody who didn't even speak English said, Al Capone, bang, bang, bang. That was their association. So I think for a lot of people, that's going to be forever associated with the city of Chicago. So it just made sense to me that we put it in a neighborhood that Al Capone frequented, and that's the setting. And my agent nixed it. He was like, this needs to be somewhere cozy, it needs to be somewhere where you can, I think his words were that you take a mental vacation to this place. And it raised my hackles a little bit, because I'm like, I like vacationing in Chicago.
Yeah.
And I argued, because one of his clients is Cleo Coyle. So the couple who write the Cleo Coyle mysteries, which are set, right in New York. And I was like, that works great as a cozy. But he was like, I don't think that would work now. We were lucky, 20 years ago when that series came out that worked. But he felt strongly that this should be set in a smaller place. So my aunt lives near Lake Geneva in Wisconsin, and it's kind of an undiscovered gem for people who aren't from the Midwest. They might not have heard of it, but it's this magnificent lake about 90 minutes north of Chicago. And there are a couple of towns, and I've kind of consolidated all of them and made the fictional town of Geneva Bay, which is Fontana and Williams Bay and Lake Geneva, kind of all elements of that mixed into one. But Lake Geneva was a place where people from Chicago going back, 150 years, built these magnificent mansions around this beautiful lake and would use it as their summer homes. And still to this day, it's very upscale, it's kind of Midwest Hamptons. But also a lot of working class people from Chicago, come up there even for a day trip. It's just a really nice place to hang out and spend time. It's a beautiful lake.
Well, I think it was interesting because what happened with you and your publisher kind of illustrates as a writer, there are things that you want to fight for, and there are things that you have to kind of say, okay, if I want to get my work published, I have to be accommodating too.
Yes, and that was one where it really only took me about a day to back down, because once I had this alternative, it actually worked much better. And I could see why, it just made everything easier, makes the setting much easier for people to visualize. And it makes the cast of characters, the sense, often in a cozy mystery, everyone kind of knows each other and is connected. It made that small town kind of feel much easier to achieve. And then, again, I totally agree with my agent that cozies are a mental escape, and having that be set in this world of glamour and money and fascinating history. Again, those things are present in Chicago, but nothing says glamour quite like, the Wrigley 30-bedroom Wrigley mansion sitting on the lake shore with all of that history, going back a century and a half.
I have to ask, for someone that's not known for their culinary proficiency, how did you end up writing a culinary cozy?
What have you heard?
Well, I believe you actually said you burned a baguette at one point in your career.
Yeah, so it is really interesting, isn't it? Because food has never been my thing. I'll go a food town, Paris, New Orleans. There's some place where people go to eat food, and people be like, "Oh, what are you going to eat? What restaurants are you going to hit?" And I'm like, "Man, it's not on my radar screen even to make those plans in advance, because it's not top of mind for me." But I've watched cooking shows my whole life. Like, that's kind of been the TV that I watch, if I just left to my own devices. So I was familiar enough with the techniques, and I can cook. I'm not totally hopeless. But during the pandemic, I think I got pretty good at doing like the Chopped style thing, where you open your fridge and you're like, these are the ingredients that currently exist in my house. I'm not going to the grocery store, or things are out of stock. So we're doing, we got peanut M&Ms, we got zucchini, and we got a box of pasta. Here we go. So that kind of made me a little bit more comfortable experimenting with recipe. By the way, don't make that recipe. That does not sound good. That's not something I would have cared about. But I think that made me more comfortable experimenting with different ingredients and taking the time to really work through things. And then for me, a lot of it was about finding the descriptive language to convey the experience of cooking, the experience of serving food, and the experience of eating food. And as a writer, that's what your job is. So whether you're setting your book on Mars or 300 years ago, you've got to figure out, what does that place smell like? What does that place feel like? What does that place look like? So it's made me appreciate food a lot more. The fact that I had to sit down and say, like, okay, when you smell cilantro, what are you smelling? Is it grassy? Is it herbal? What is it, lemony? Like, what are those aromas? And when you add something to a dish, how do you describe how it changes that dish? So I definitely walked backwards into being able to appropriately convey those chefly experiences that are, because Delilah is absolutely obsessed with food. It's all she thinks
Mhm.
about. She spends all of her time on it. So I had to figure out how to get into that headspace. And for me, it was through the writing of it, and some research as well. But yeah, mostly through the writing.
Yeah, and you've really succeeded because it's suffused with all those culinary notes and things that readers want. And you also talk about like pairings with wine. There's a wine expert in the mystery, and she talks of well, I guess the characters talk about which wines work with pizza and which wouldn't. And
Yeah, and I read as I was going along for my research, I actually have it here because I wanted to talk to you about it. Cork Dork, have you read this
oh
book?
yeah,
Yeah, this is a great book, and I mean, it's funny, it's well organized, but um, that's something that I loved about that book, was really getting into the flavor profiles of different kinds of wine and what makes people so obsessed with it. That helped me get into the head of these chefs who spend 14 hours a day, 6 days a week cooking. Why would you do that
mhm,
unless there was something more to it than just the work? I mean, you could work in a factory, you could work, if you're going to work that hard, there are a lot of things that you could do where you make more money.
mhm,
But this is what people choose to do because of that rich sensory experience that's unrivaled really in any other kind of work.
mhm. And just to be fair, you did create all the recipes in 6 Feet Deep Dish. Is that correct?
I did, and I made them a bunch of times. I feel actually a little bit guilty because my husband has developed lactose intolerance over the last few years. I'm like, was it me? Was it all the deep dish? But
Can you
yeah,
make pizza with cheese substitutes? Does that work or?
so for the third book, the one I'm working on now, that's what I'm working on because my daughter is a vegetarian. My husband can no longer eat dairy. Um, so I got really into this idea of like, how do you create a pizza experience that can satisfy all of those different tastes? So I'm working on that, those free from recipes for the current book. But yeah, it's possible. It's the deep dish pizza piece of it is makes it difficult because you could just do, there are plenty of pizzas that don't have
That's right.
cheese.
Yeah.
But that's rare in deep dish because part of what you're doing with the deep dish really is like baking that cheese until it oozes. That's part of the experience. So
Mm.
trying to replicate that with fake cheese or other things is going to be challenging, but fingers crossed.
One of the things that I loved about the book was it's so elegantly constructed in terms of a mystery. You have what I think is very current, very topical kind of motive and crime. And I'm not going to talk a lot about it because I don't want to spoil it for readers. But I was just so impressed. I thought, wow, that's like a 21st century kind of murder motive plumped into that cozy thing. How, as a writer, you've written mysteries before. This is your first in the new series. Do you approach the books? Do you kind of plot things out in advance? Do you sit down, hope it all comes together? Because in a mystery, you really have to have those clues in there.
Yeah, I've done it both ways. I think I decided as of this book that I'm more of a plotter than I am a pantser, which are the two ways that people talk about writing. Because this book, I thought, you know what, I've done this a bunch of times now. I had three books in the original series. I've already written the first two in this series, and then the one middle grade one that I've written a bunch of novels. I can
Mhm.
just put it together. I kind of know. And I found myself wasting a lot of words because I would start down some plot thing that I thought was going to come together later and then realize, oh, it's not tight, it's not as tight as I want it. And I hate doing that because I'm still working a day job. I've got 2 kids, and I can't waste days. I don't have time to just sit around writing my way toward the story.
Mhm.
um so that was a hard lesson, that it's kind of surprising that after all these years it took me this long to learn. You're just more comfortable once you've got all of your things laid out. And the way I tend to do plotting is that I write on little tiny pieces of paper or little like half note cards the things that need to happen, and then
Um,
I look at it all laid out, and then I try to think, oh, okay, well, we kind of forgot about that subplot, so this needs to go here. We need a
mhm.
little bit more on that. That doesn't make sense in terms of that character's motivation. It really helps me see things a little bit more clearly. Yeah, and I think I just got maybe a little bit cocky, because really it goes back to that project management experience of my earlier career, that you don't just wing it and be like, oh, probably we'll just bring some building materials on site, get some patients in there, and then we'll have a clinic, like it'll be fine. So that, in life, I'm definitely a very organized person. I like my to-do lists, and I like to think about how each piece of action is going to lead to the next thing in the chain that needs to happen. And I think with this one, at the beginning of this year, there was my son's daycare closed for a period of time because of the COVID wave. And then my husband was extremely busy with teaching and other work related stuff this semester. So I think I kind of like skipped over that step, and then only just realized when I was 2/3 of the way through the book that I have wasted a lot of time that I think I could have been cleaner with if I had plotted more carefully.
We've talked a little bit about cozies in general, and you've kind of said a few things about what you think are necessary ingredients. Can you kind of expand on your definition of a cozy mystery, and maybe who you might see as quintessential examples for readers that are new to cozy mysteries?
Sure. So I recently had a conversation with someone who I explained that I write these mysteries. They're called cozy mysteries. And she goes, oh, I love those. I call them adult Nancy Drews.
Oh,
And I'd never heard of that before, but I thought that's a really good way to conceptualize it, that, that it's, there's a formula. Usually, it's pretty much like you have your compelling characters who are always going to drive the thing forward. And then usually elements like, that's why it probably won't surprise cozy readers that this idea of pizza plus cat originated at the publisher, because they're constantly thinking of like, okay, what are new elements that we can mix together with things that people find cozy and serve up, in a fresh way. So those kind of cozy elements of, food, family, holidays, pets, things that people find comforting. And then slice that through with a dead body. So I don't like to put, even if I had, unlimited free reign to do whatever I wanted, I don't think I would like to put a lot of sex, blood, gore on the page. It's just not a space that I like to inhabit. I've done it in short stories, and I think that it's kind of a palate cleanser, after you write something really cozy, to be able to write something dark. But it affects my mood. And I think as a reader, I prefer to be able to sleep at night after I've read something.
Yeah. You have written a couple of short stories. I was going to go into that, and they're a little bit different than your usual mysteries.
Yeah, so I have, that's where I run wild a little bit and have a little bit more, give myself a little bit more to play with. So I'm trying to think if I've ever written a short story that was cozy, and I don't think I have. I think that they're all pretty dark. So I've written for some mystery collections, and then I wrote after I had my son. So that first year was just really hard to find the space. And I saw an announcement for a short story contest that was a 1,500 word story, and it was feminist sci-fi. Never written sci-fi. I like to think that I write feminist all the time, but never really intentionally went about doing so. But I thought 1,500 words, I think I could do that. I feel like if I sat down for a month or something, I could probably put something together. So I did, and I won that contest, which was really great. Like, I got to fly out to LA and I got an award, and they read my short story, like a bunch of actors who were like B-list, I would say solidly B-list actors, read the winning stories. And that was after thinking that I was going to give up. Like, that was a big boost to think, oh, actually, this is a totally different group of people who've read my writing. So maybe there's something here that I can do this, like that I can write.
What's the best piece of advice you've ever been given about writing? What would you tell someone who wants to be a writer?
I think just finding people who you respect and being able to really absorb critique and turn it into something positive. For me, that was pretty crucial. So I found when we moved back to the States, I wrote the first book just kind of by myself with not much in terms of a support network of the Chaplain series. And after that, when we moved back to the States, I joined a writers group and actually ended up joining another writers group. So I have two kind of writers groups that I've worked with, and just extremely fortunate in the Virginia Tech community and kind of the larger community that there are a lot of people who love writing and are really, really talented writers. So we've got a couple of retired writing teachers, for example, in one of the groups that I'm in. And I think being able to really hear what people are saying and try to lower your defenses as much as possible, because it is really hard. You know, the first time that you get that bad critique, or even, you know, once you've published something, that terrible Amazon review, it's hard not to take it personally because you put your heart and soul into this thing and then it's just out there. But I think it helps to think of it as work for me, that it makes it less personal, that it's like, this is a piece of work and my goal is to get it published and to have people enjoy it. You know, the same way that as a project manager, somebody might have given me a task, you know, that you're going to organize this meeting of scientists and these are the goals that we want to achieve. If somebody said, well, I really feel like it would be a better format if we did it, you know, with a couple of panels and then some small group breakout sessions, you wouldn't be like, how dare you suggest such a thing? So I think depersonalizing the work a little bit, that once it's written, you wrote it, you ask people to read it, and now your job is to listen and figure out what in what they're saying are things that you want to incorporate into your changes, and what are things that you feel so strongly about that you feel like you want to defend to the death.
Yeah. Let's switch gears a little bit and talk about Mindy as a reader. What have you been reading that you'd like to share with others?
So I'm going to preface this. I'm a little ashamed to say that this past year I have read maybe 5 books total. It's been a hard year.
That's a couple years.
Find the time.
Yeah.
But in general, the books that I fly through are either cozy mystery type stuff, like lighter mysteries, or weirdly, I read a lot of nonfiction, like science books. And I think that started when I was first in that environment where I really felt totally out of sync with what everybody else was talking about. So the first book I read there was The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, which is just a wonderful story about, you know, basically the first kind of like stem cell research, early kind of clinical trials, patient stuff. And it's a great human story as well, deals with a lot of, you know, race and medicine and a lot of interesting themes. And since then, I've read a number of kind of nonfiction sciencey things. The one that I read most recently that I really love is this book called Escape from Earth, A Secret History of the Space Rocket, by Fraser McDonald. And again, like there's science in here, but it's very heavy on the background. And it's about the Jet Propulsion Lab, JPL, in California, and the development of that, and rocketry, you know, what we think of as like kind of a given now that, you know, rockets are a thing, you know, getting to space is a thing, being able to do long range ballistic missiles is a thing, but getting to that point took a lot of innovation. And the group of people who were behind that team that was innovating at that time were really fascinating characters. So there were a lot of political radicals, so communists, which was obviously problematic when you're talking about federal government contracts for defense. But then some of them got into this cult as well. That was like a crazy sex cult, basically. So seeing their personal lives and how that impacted the work and how that impacted the trajectory of what the program would go on to be and who would ultimately get credit for certain discoveries was really very fascinating to me. So that's a book that I've loved. I've been reading Dick Francis.
Oh.
So these, somebody keeps putting them in the little free library near my house. And every time I see one, I just grab it because Dick Francis is one of my favorite writers. The writing is just good. And for people who haven't read Dick Francis, he himself was a really interesting character. He worked for the Queen Mother, so the Queen's mother, as sort of like a stable master. I don't know what the job title would be, but he looked after her horses. So he's got all this deep knowledge in the world of horse racing and horse breeding and transporting horses from place to place. And it's not a series per se, although he does sometimes reuse the same characters, but the setting is usually in the world of horses, and the characters are usually middle class or upper middle class British men from, these are 50s, kind of 60s era for the most part. So it's a bit James Bond with horses, but maybe not quite as adept. It depends on the character that he's writing in the setting. So maybe the person is kind of bumbling into something, but there's usually a mystery element.
Yeah.
Yes, a little bit more human, exactly. So not a superhero, just a guy trying to do stuff. But that's one where, for me, the writing never fails to be excellent. The way that he can describe a character and the way that he can move a plot along, I think is rarely replicated. So those are my kind of odd ones. And then I'll tell you a little bit about the cozies that I really love.
Okay.
So Cleo Coyle, who I mentioned earlier, which is actually not a person, but a husband and wife team who write under that name, who write the Coffee House Mysteries. They're very cozy, lots of great coffee knowledge for people who like that aspect of a cozy, learning a little bit about a world that they may be not familiar with. But the writing is just so good. And that's a theme that I realized when I was picking these books, that for me, it's all about the writing at the end of the day. Even if the plot is great, the Da Vinci Code is a perfect example. That great plot, can't put it down, but you're just like, oh, yeah. I would much rather have it the other way around, that maybe not much goes on with the plot, but the writing is excellent. And I find those coffee house books pretty much don't disappoint. They've always got great plots too.
You do.
I really like these Bake Shop Mysteries by Ellie Alexander. I think that that's another one where you get plenty of that sensory detail of cooking, but the main character is smart, which is, just another wonderful thing when you're reading and she's one step ahead of you and she's doing the things that you want her to do. That's always a nice feeling, rather, that frustration that comes when, don't go into the library. Why are you going into the library?
Yeah, the romance genre, they call it the TSTL, heroine too stupid to live.
I have not heard that, but absolutely. Yeah, that's very
it's a romance thing, I'm not saying romance characters are like that, but when romance readers read a book and the heroine's doing things that are totally out of character or just unbelievable, then you say, yes, she's too stupid to live.
Yes. So that's something that these heroines definitely are not. And I really like that series a lot, I think. And the food is great in there. And then this one's a little bit more obscure, Faithful Unto Death.
Oh.
So this is by Stephanie J. Evans.
Is that the golf one?
Pardon?
Is that the golf one?
Yes.
Okay, yeah.
So you've read this one? Yeah, so I love, there are only 2 books in the series, and this is going back to when I was writing about hospital chaplains. I looked at a lot of books in this vein. So Julia Spencer Fleming blurbed for this book, and it's in that vein, if people are familiar with the Julia Spencer Fleming mysteries, of having kind of a reluctant sleuth who's in the clergy. And again, the writing is marvelous. The relationships between the characters, it's almost like a novel about a family that just happens to have a murderer in it. And I love Stephanie J. Evans' writing as well. So that's something that I just recently revisited that book. I read it years ago, but I saw it on my shelf and I was like, I love that book. And I think overall, what I would say, actually, this goes back to Cork Dork, which is something that I read last year. But one of the conclusions in Cork Dork, because she kind of unpicks a lot about wine snobbery, that, she shows that in blind taste tests, even master sommeliers often will get it wrong. They can be presented the same wine twice within a tasting round and grade it completely differently. Like once they love it and once, 10 wines later, they don't love it. So it's about context. It's about, what has happened to you in that intervening period of time. It's about what happens to your taste buds as you taste other things. And she kind of comes down on the side of like, if you like it, then drink it. Don't be influenced by whether it came in a box or if it has a cork or if other people say that it's a good wine or if it's expensive. Just taste it and learn how to really taste and see if you like it. And for me, that's how I feel about cozy mysteries, that a lot of times these are seen as fluff and they're seen as, like little lady books, but I know that I like them because I like the familiar elements mixed in with some less familiar elements. I like being able to sleep at night. And it's what I want to read and it's what I want to write.
That's so smart. You've actually just in this last segment said two things that I'd like to highlight that were really clever. The first is for readers that are having a challenge at a particular point in their life, they're not reading as much, go to nonfiction, because there are a lot of truly amazing, fascinating books, like you mentioned, that rocket book that would just pull a fiction reader in. And I think the other thing is you talked a lot about, you call it the writing of the author's writing. I would call it the author's voice. If the author has a strong voice, that's going to bring you in as a reader. And you have that kind of unique, distinctive voice that people are going to read 6 Feet Deep Dish because of the way you tell the story, not just because of the setting or the characters or anything like that.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I think that that's something, I really take that compliment as a great compliment because it's something that I've striven to be able to do and tried, with the input that I put into my brain to read things that I think are well written, because I know for me, that makes all the difference. If you've ever heard two people tell the same joke, that's what this is, that there's not a huge, it's a cozy mystery. You're not going to have vampires and UFOs in it. So within the confines of what you're doing, that's going to be fairly formulaic. Got to have the pizza, got to have the cat, got to have the nice setting, got to have the amateur sleuth. There are a lot of breaks, put on you when you're writing that way, which I actually quite appreciate. But then it also makes you think, well, then what is this going to do for a reader that other cat cozy isn't going to do? And the hope is that it's going to tell that joke, with the funniest possible punchline and tell that sad anecdote, with tears really running down your face.
Yeah, I think you've succeeded. Before we run out of time, and I can't believe how quickly it's gone by, what's next for you as an author?
So I'm working on the third deep dish mystery right now. So that's going to be set in, I'm doing something a little bit different. The whole thing is going to be set in one of these mansions that ring the lake.
Oh.
So we're taking her out of her restaurant. She's catering a party and it's got a prohibition theme. So we're playing a little bit more with those kind of old school gangster elements.
Funnies, yeah.
And I found it really challenging. I think it's going to come together, but it's been hard because having all the characters there all the time and not being able to break off as easily and go do a bit of investigation over here and have a nice pause so that we can all take a breather and have a nice meal, being able to create a plot that works and have the characters interact in the ways that I think people will want to see them interact. It's been harder to find those moments within the setting that I constructed. So note to self, be careful what you set out to do.
When does the second book come? Because this is the third that you're working on.
The second book is set to release at the end of April 2023.
Oh.
Yeah. So it's already, I just saw it the other day, it's already on Amazon. So people can go ahead, if they like 6 Feet Deep Dish, go ahead and pre-order. It's called Ashes to Ashes and Crust to Crust.
Oh,
is book 2. Yeah, so that one is already available for pre-order and it's well underway. I think there's just a little bit to finish with page proofs and then we're done with that one.
And how can readers learn more about you and your books? Are you on social media and what platforms?
I am. So I have a website, mindyquigley.com. And then I just recently, I'd been on Twitter for years. And I had an epiphany just recently that I did not like the way Twitter makes me feel or makes me think about other people. I felt like the interactions that you have are often not kind and supportive. So I just started a couple of weeks ago with Instagram, and where has this been all my life? I love it.
Yeah, that would be the perfect for someone who's very design centered and things like that.
Yeah, and I like the supportive interactions that people have. I like the kinds of things that people post. I'm a pretty visual person, so that just works much better for me without all the noise of Twitter. So yeah, I recently took my leave of Twitter and have moved over to Instagram, and then I'm on Facebook as well, which is kind of the tried and true way to interact with readers.
That's true. Well, that's just been such a quick amount of time and such a lot of wonderful information. I want to thank Mindy Quigley for joining us virtually at the Poison Pen. Her new book is 6 Feet Deep Dish. I would encourage anyone who loves cozies or culinary food-related mysteries to consider it. It's truly one of the best things I've read this year. And I will add that if you're a local Scottsdale resident, Paige Shelton, who's a fan of the Poison Pen and has visited there quite often, was the person that said you have to read this. She's been a big champion of it, and I trust Paige's judgment.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, her books, another
Yeah.
writer who just writes really amazing books. Her series that's set in Alaska. Yeah, you'll just fly through those pages. It's very riveting. But that's thank you, John Charles. That's so sweet.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you, Mindy, for joining us, and thank you for tuning in to another virtual author chat at the Poison Pen. We look forward to connecting with you next time.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Hello. We hope you're enjoying our programs and podcasts with authors. We'd like to expand them, and your help would be appreciated. Please make a donation at poisonedpenfoundation.org. 100% of the proceeds will go to help connect authors with readers in this difficult time. Thank you.